Episode 1. The Shadow Bride. The palace gates loomed like the jaws of a beast, carved from obsidian and etched with silver runes that shimmered under the moonlight. Thorn stood before them, his ceremonial robes too long for his frame, borrowed from the brother who had vanished without a word. The guards didn't speak. They didn't need to. Everyone knew he wasn't the one meant to be here. He kept his head bowed as he was led through the marble halls, past towering wolf statues and tapestries of war. The air smelled of pine and frost, clean, sharp, and unfamiliar. His serpent blood recoiled from it. They stopped outside a garden pavilion, where moonflowers bloomed in eerie silence. Inside, voices murmured. "It's just an arrangement," said a low, impatient voice. "No need for such fuss." Thorn froze. He recognized the speaker, Prince Lucien, the Empire's second son. The wolf shifter. The one he was to marry. "He'll arrive, we'll sign the bond, and that'll be the end of it. I don't care who they send." Thorn's fingers curled around the edge of his sleeve. Of course. Why would anyone care about the substitute? The shadow twin. The one who didn't smile, didn't charm, didn't shine. A servant gestured for him to enter. Thorn stepped into the pavilion, the silk of his robes whispering against the stone. He kept his gaze low as taught. His serpent eyes, too pale, too strange, had always unsettled people. Silence fell. Lucien stood at the far end, dressed in ceremonial black trimmed with silver. His hair was ash blonde, his eyes a piercing gray. He looked like winter incarnate. Thorn risked a glance. Lucien was staring at him. Not with disdain. Not with boredom. With something else. Confusion. Curiosity. A flicker of something warmer. "You're not Kale," Lucien said quietly. Thorn swallowed. "No, Your Highness. I'm Thorn." His twin. Lucien's gaze sharpened. "They sent you instead?" Thorn nodded. "He left. I was the only option." Lucien stepped closer, his boots silent on the stone. "You're different." Thorn braced himself. "I know I'm not what you expected. I won't trouble you. I'll follow the terms. I won't speak unless spoken to." Lucien's jaw tightened. He turned to his aide. "Cancel the banquet," he said. "I want a private ceremony. No distractions. No mistakes." The aide blinked. "But, Your Highness." "Everything must be perfect," Lucien said, eyes still on Thorn. "Understood." Thorn's breath caught. "Perfect? For him?" Lucien turned back, voice softer now. "You don't have to lower your gaze. Not with me." Thorn looked up. And for the first time in his life, someone didn't flinch at his eyes. Episode 2. The Prince's Gaze. The moon hung low over the palace gardens, casting silver light across the stone paths and whispering leaves. Thorn sat alone beneath a willow tree, his ceremonial robes folded neatly beside him. The private ceremony had ended hours ago, quiet, brief, and strangely gentle. Lucien hadn't spoken much. But he hadn't looked away either. Thorn traced the edge of a petal between his fingers, the silence around him thick with questions he didn't dare ask. Was it pity? Curiosity? Or something else entirely? Footsteps approached. He didn't turn. "You're still out here," Lucien said, voice low and steady. Thorn nodded. "I didn't want to intrude." Lucien stepped closer, the scent of pine and frost following him. "You're not intruding. This is your home now." Thorn's fingers stilled. "Home," he echoed, as if tasting the word for the first time. Lucien sat beside him, not too close, but close enough that Thorn could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Wolf shifters always ran warm. Serpent shifters, cold. "You didn't flinch," Lucien said suddenly. Thorn blinked. "When?" "When I touched your hand during the binding. Most people do. My aura's intense." Thorn hesitated. It felt steady. Like a heartbeat. Lucien turned to him, eyes narrowing slightly. "You're not like your brother." Thorn smiled faintly bitter. "No. He's everything I'm not. Charming. Bold. Alive." Lucien studied him. "And yet, you're the one who stayed." Thorn looked down. "Because I had nowhere else to go." Lucien was quiet for a moment. Then, "I didn't want this marriage," he admitted. "I thought it would be a cage. Another duty. Another mask." Thorn's breath caught. "And now?" Lucien's gaze softened. Now I'm wondering if fate knew better than I did. The wind stirred the willow branches above them, casting dancing shadows across their faces. Thorn dared to meet his eyes. You don't have to pretend for me. I know what I am. Lucien's voice was firm. Then let me be clear. You're not nothing. You're not a shadow. You're the only person who's looked at me without fear. Thorn swallowed hard. I don't know how to be what you need. Lucien reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from Thorn's face. Then let's figure it out together. Episode 3. Shared Dreams. Thorn woke with a start. The moonlight spilling through the tall windows painted silver streaks across the silk sheets. His breath came in shallow waves, heart pounding from a dream he couldn't quite remember. Only fragments remained. A forest of frost, a howl in the distance, and eyes that burned like embers. He sat up, fingers trembling. A knock echoed softly against the chamber door. Thorn. Lucien's voice was quiet, hesitant. Thorn pulled the robe tighter around his shoulders. You can come in. Lucien stepped inside, dressed in a loose tunic, his hair slightly tousled. He looked softer in the dim light. Less like a prince, more like a person. Did you feel it too? Lucien asked. Thorn blinked. Feel what? Lucien hesitated, then sat at the edge of the bed. The dream. The forest. The howl. Thorn's breath caught. You saw it. Lucien nodded slowly. I was running. Searching. And then I saw you. Standing in the snow. Thorn's voice was barely a whisper. I thought I imagined it. Lucien looked at him, eyes unreadable. This bond between us, it's not just ceremonial. Something ancient is stirring. Thorn's gaze dropped. I'm not strong enough for magic like that. Lucien reached out, gently touching Thorn's wrist. You are. I felt your presence in the dream. It calmed me. Thorn's lips parted, unsure how to respond. No one had ever said his presence brought peace. Lucien continued, voice low. There's a legend among wolf shifters that when a true bond forms, the pair begins to share dreams, emotions, even pain. Thorn's eyes widened. You think we're that? Lucien didn't answer immediately. Instead, he traced the edge of Thorn's palm with his thumb, as if memorizing it. I don't know what fate intended, he said. But I know I don't want to ignore this. Thorn swallowed. I'm scared. Lucien's grip tightened, not painfully, just enough to anchor him. Then let me be scared with you. Outside, the moon dipped lower, casting a soft glow over the two figures seated on the bed, one born of shadow, the other of flame, bound now by something deeper than duty. Something that whispered of destiny. Episode 4. The Garden of Thorns. The palace gardens were quiet at dawn, veiled in mist and dew. Thorn wandered alone, his fingers trailing along the edges of unfamiliar leaves. The Serpent Shifter estate had never allowed him near anything so delicate. He'd been told he'd wilt flowers just by standing near them. But here, the moonflowers bloomed in his wake. He paused beside a rose bush, its petals a deep crimson. One thorn caught his sleeve, tugging gently. He reached to free it, and the moment his skin brushed the stem, the entire bush shimmered. A pulse of silver light rippled through the leaves. Thorn stumbled back. You felt that too, came Lucien's voice behind him. Thorn turned, startled. I didn't mean to disturb anything. Lucien stepped forward, eyes fixed on the glowing rose bush. You didn't disturb it. You awakened it. Thorn frowned. Awakened. Lucien crouched beside the bush, brushing his fingers over the petals. These gardens are enchanted. They respond to magic, especially bonded magic. Thorn's breath caught. You think it's because of us? Lucien looked up at him, eyes soft. I think your power has been buried for a long time. And now, it's reaching out. Thorn stared at his hands. I was always told I had none. Thought I was born wrong. Lucien stood, stepping closer. Then they were wrong. Thorn hesitated. Why are you being kind to me? Lucien's voice was quiet. Because I see you. Not the shadow they painted. Not the substitute. Just you. Thorn's throat tightened. I don't know how to be seen. Lucien reached out, gently taking Thorn's hand. Then let me show you. The rose bush pulsed again, brighter this time. A single petal detached and floated upward, glowing like a tiny star. Thorn watched it rise, heart aching with something he couldn't name. Hope, maybe. Or the beginning of it. Episode 5. The Howl and the Hiss. The palace courtyard was unusually quiet. Thorn stood beneath the archway, watching the guards shift uneasily. Something was wrong. The air felt heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Even the moonflowers in the garden had curled inward, their petals trembling. Lucien appeared beside him, dressed in his training leathers, his silver eyes scanning the horizon. "You feel it too?" he asked. Thorn nodded. "Something's coming." A horn sounded from the northern wall, sharp, urgent. Lucien's posture snapped into readiness. "Stay here." Thorn grabbed his arm. "No." Lucien turned, surprised. "Thorn." "I'm not a fragile ornament," Thorn said, voice steady. "I'm your bonded. Let me stand with you." Lucien hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded. They moved together through the palace halls, emerging onto the battlements. Below, a group of cloaked figures approached, their steps silent, their presence unnatural. Magic pulsed around them, dark, twisted. "Assassins," Lucien muttered. "Sent by the Eastern Court. They oppose our union." Thorn's blood ran cold. "They want to break the bond." Lucien growled low in his throat, the sound primal. "They'll fail." The first figure raised a hand, casting a wave of shadow toward the wall. Lucien leapt forward, shifting midair, his form exploding into a massive silver wolf, claws gleaming, eyes burning. Thorn stepped back, heart racing. Another figure turned toward him, lips curling into a sneer. The Serpent Twin. "Easy prey." Thorn's eyes narrowed. He raised his hand, and the ground beneath the assassin cracked. Vines burst forth, thorned and glowing silver, wrapping around the attacker's limbs. The hiss of magic echoed through the courtyard. Lucien, mid-battle, paused. Thorn stood tall, serpent eyes blazing, surrounded by a halo of moonlight and thorns. Lucien shifted back, panting. "You summoned that?" Thorn nodded, trembling. "I didn't know I could." Lucien stepped closer, voice fierce. "You're more than they ever let you be." Thorn's voice was quiet. "I'm scared." Lucien cupped his face, thumb brushing his cheek. "Then let me be your strength." Behind them, the last assassin fell. The courtyard was silent again. But something had changed. Thorn wasn't just a shadow anymore. He was a force. And Lucien was no longer alone. Episode 6. The Moonlit Vow. The palace was quiet after the attack. Guards patrolled the halls with sharper eyes, and the royal court buzzed with whispers of betrayal and unrest. But in the west wing, behind a heavy oak door, the world felt still. Thorn sat on the windowsill, wrapped in a soft cloak, watching the moon rise over the frost-laced gardens. His fingers traced the edge of the glass, heart heavy with questions he hadn't dared ask. Lucien entered quietly, closing the door behind him. "They've reinforced the outer walls," he said. "No one will get through again." Thorn nodded, but didn't speak. Lucien crossed the room, stopping a few feet away. "You've been quiet." Thorn's voice was soft. "I'm trying to understand why you're still here." Lucien frowned. "What do you mean?" Thorn turned, eyes shimmering in the moonlight. "You didn't choose me. You didn't want this bond. And yet, you keep showing up." Lucien stepped closer. "I didn't choose the arrangement." "That's true. But I did choose you." Thorn's breath caught. "Why?" Lucien sat beside him, gaze distant. "Because I know what it's like to be seen as a duty. A weapon. A name, not a person." Thorn looked at him, surprised. Lucien continued, voice low. "My father trained me to lead. To fight. To win. But never to feel. I was praised for victories, punished for softness. I learned to wear silence like armor." Thorn's throat tightened. "And now?" Lucien met his eyes. "Now I see someone who understands that silence. Who doesn't flinch from it. Who fills it with something gentle." Thorn blinked. "You think I'm gentle?" Lucien smiled faintly. "Gentle doesn't mean weak. You stood beside me when others ran. You faced danger with trembling hands and still didn't back down." Thorn looked away. "I was terrified." Lucien reached out, brushing his fingers against Thorn's. "So was I." They sat in silence, the moon casting silver light across their joined hands. Lucien spoke again, voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what this bond will become, but I vow this, under moonlight and thorns, I will never treat you like a shadow. Thorn's eyes shimmered. And I vow, I'll never hide from you again. Outside, the wind stirred the trees. Inside, two hearts beat in quiet rhythm. Not as strangers, but as something new. Episode 7. The Crown and the Choice. The royal court was colder than usual. Not in temperature, but in tone. Every glance, every whisper, every bowed head carried tension. The attack had rattled the empire, and now the council demanded answers. Lucien stood at the center of the throne room, flanked by generals and advisors. His ceremonial armor gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, but his eyes were shadowed. Thorn watched from the gallery above, hidden behind a velvet curtain. He wasn't allowed to speak here. Not yet. Not officially. The bond has destabilized our alliances, said Lord Veermont, voice sharp. The Eastern Court sees it as a threat. We must annul it before war breaks out. Lucien's jaw tightened. Breaking the bond won't stop war. It will only prove we're weak enough to bend. You were meant to marry Kale, another counselor snapped. Not his twin. Not the quiet one. This union was strategic. Lucien's voice was low, dangerous. And yet, it's Thorn who stood beside me when assassins came through our gates. The room fell silent. Thorn's heart pounded. You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment, Queen Isolde said, stepping forward. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were steel. You were raised to lead, not to love. Lucien turned to her slowly. And what does that leadership cost us? A fractured empire? A court ruled by fear? She didn't flinch. You must choose, Lucien. The bond or the crown? Thorn's breath caught. Lucien looked up, straight at him. Their eyes met across the room. No magic. No words. Just the weight of everything between them. Lucien turned back to the court. Then hear me clearly, he said. I choose the bond. Gasps rippled through the chamber. I choose the one who sees me. Who fights beside me. Who makes me believe I'm more than a title. Thorn's hand gripped the curtain. Queen Isolde's voice was ice. Then you will not be king. Lucien stepped forward, shoulders squared. Then I will be something better. I will be free. The court erupted in chaos. But Thorn didn't hear it. He only saw Lucien, standing tall, defiant, and utterly his. Episode 8. The Hearth Beyond the Gate. The wind carried the scent of pine and rain as Lucien guided the horse-drawn cart down the winding forest path. The palace had faded behind them hours ago, swallowed by mist and memory. Ahead, nestled between hills and trees, stood a modest cottage, stone walls, moss-covered roof, and a crooked chimney that leaned like it had secrets. Thorn sat beside him, wrapped in a travel cloak, hands tucked into his sleeves. He hadn't spoken much since they left. Not out of fear, but something quieter. Something like awe. It's small, Lucien said, voice low. But it's ours. Thorn looked up. You chose this. Lucien nodded. Years ago. I used to come here when court became too loud. No one knows it's here. Not even my mother. Thorn stepped down from the cart, boots crunching against damp leaves. He walked slowly toward the cottage, fingers brushing the ivy-covered doorframe. It's peaceful, he murmured. Lucien smiled. That's the point. Inside, the cottage was simple, wooden beams, a stone hearth, shelves lined with dried herbs and old books. A single bed sat beneath the window, and a table stood in the center, carved with claw marks and candle wax. Thorn ran his fingers over the table. You lived here. Lucien shrugged. Escaped here. Thorn turned to him. And now? Lucien stepped closer. Now I want to build something here. With you. Thorn's breath caught. They spent the afternoon unpacking books, blankets, dried fruit, and a single silver dagger Lucien insisted on keeping near the door. Thorn found a cracked teacup and placed it on the windowsill, where the light hit just right. That night, they sat by the fire. Lucien stirred the pot of stew while Thorn read aloud from an old journal he'd found tucked beneath the floorboards. The words were faded, but the stories were warm, tales of love, loss, and moonlit promises. Do you think we'll be forgotten? Thorn asked suddenly. Lucien looked up. Why would you ask that? Thorn's voice was soft. We left everything behind. The court, the crown, the legacy. Lucien crossed the room, kneeling beside him. Let them forget. Let them rewrite history. I don't care. He took Thorn's hand, pressing it to his chest. This is the only legacy I want. You, me, the life we choose. Thorn's eyes shimmered. I never thought I'd be chosen. Lucien leaned in, forehead resting against Thorn's. Then let me choose you. Every day. Outside, the wind howled gently through the trees. Inside, the fire crackled. And in the quiet between heartbeats, something sacred bloomed. Not duty. Not destiny. Just love. Episode 9. The Serpent's Echo. The morning fog clung to the trees like a secret. Thorn stood barefoot on the cottage porch, a steaming cup of tea in his hands. The forest was quiet, save for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of a mourning dove. For the first time in his life, he felt still. Safe. Lucien was inside, humming softly as he chopped vegetables for breakfast. The sound was low and warm, like the hearth fire that never seemed to go out. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps against the wooden door. Thorn turned, heart already sinking. Lucien opened the door, blade in hand, but lowered it when he saw the messenger, an imperial hawk-shifter in formal black, bearing the royal seal. Message for Prince Lucien and Consort Thorn, the hawk said, voice clipped. Lucien took the scroll, eyes scanning it quickly. His jaw clenched. It's from the High Council, he said, handing it to Thorn. They're summoning you. Thorn stared at the parchment. The wax seal was unbroken, but he already knew what it would say. They want me to testify, he whispered. About Cale. About why he ran. Lucien stepped closer. You don't have to go. We're not theirs anymore. Thorn shook his head. If I don't, they'll twist the story. Blame you. Blame us. Lucien's voice was firm. Let them. I won't let them drag you back into that world. Thorn looked up, eyes shining. But I was born in that world. I can't keep pretending it doesn't echo in me. Lucien's expression softened. You're not who they said you were. Thorn smiled faintly. No, but I'm not who I want to be yet either. He turned the scroll over in his hands, then met Lucien's gaze. I need to face them. Not for them, for me. Lucien nodded slowly. Then I'll go with you. Thorn's voice caught. You'd return to the court? After everything. Lucien took his hand. I'd walk into fire for you. The hawk shifter cleared his throat. The council expects your arrival in 3 days. Thorn looked out at the forest, their sanctuary, their beginning, and felt the weight of the past pressing in. But this time, he wouldn't face it alone. Episode 10. The Serpent's Dance. The palace gates loomed again, but this time, Thorn didn't flinch. He rode beside Lucien, cloaked in deep green, serpent sigils embroidered across his color. The guards bowed as they passed, not to the prince alone, but to the consort who had faced assassins and awakened magic. Inside, the throne room was packed. Nobles, counselors, and his family all gathered to hear his testimony. Thorn stood before them, the scroll in his hand trembling slightly. Queen Isolde sat at the head, flanked by the High Council. His father, Lord Severin, stood to the side, arms crossed, eyes cold. His mother didn't meet his gaze. You may speak, the counselor said. Thorn stepped forward. You asked why Cale ran. You asked what I know. So I'll tell you. The room fell silent. Cale didn't run because of fear. He ran because of freedom. Because he was tired of being used, just like I was. Lord Severin scoffed. You were never used. You were barely noticed. Thorn's voice didn't waver. Exactly. I was the quiet one. The shadow. The one you could ignore until you needed a body to fill a throne. Lucien stepped forward, but Thorn raised a hand. Let me finish. He turned to the court. Cale left because he saw what this place does to people. How it twists love into leverage. How it teaches sons to fight for approval instead of peace. He looked at his father. You taught me silence. You taught me shame. But you never taught me how to live. Lord Severin's face darkened. You speak like a traitor. Thorn stepped closer. No. I speak like someone who finally has a voice. He turned to the council. I won't beg for your approval. I won't apologize for the bond one share with Lucien. I won't be your scapegoat. Queen Isolde studied him. And what do you want, Thorn of the Serpent Line? Thorn met her gaze. I want truth. I want peace. And I want you to know I am not Cale's shadow. I am my own flame. Lucien smiled, pride flickering in his eyes. The council murmured. Some nodded. Others frowned. But Thorn didn't care. He had spoken. And the palace would never see him the same way again. Bonus epilogue. The Letter Beneath the Moon. The cottage was quiet again. The fire crackled softly, casting golden light across the wooden beams. Outside, the forest rustled with early spring winds, and moonlight spilled across the garden where new vines had begun to bloom, silver-thorned and serpent-grown. Thorn sat at the table, sketching symbols into a leather-bound journal. Lucien leaned against the doorframe, sipping tea and watching him with quiet affection. You always look so serious when you write, Lucien teased. Thorn smiled without looking up. I'm trying to remember everything. Not just the pain, but the peace. Lucien crossed the room and kissed the top of his head. Then write slowly. We have time. A knock interrupted them. Not sharp. Not urgent. Just familiar. Lucien opened the door to find a courier hawk perched on the railing, a scroll tied to its leg. The seal was broken, the parchment worn. Thorn's breath caught. Lucien untied the scroll and handed it to him. Thorn unrolled it slowly, fingers trembling. To the brother I failed, I didn't run because I was brave. I ran because I was afraid I'd become what they wanted me to be. You stayed. You faced them. You became something they never saw coming. I'm proud of you. I'm safe now. I've found my own path. And I hope one day, when the world is quieter, we'll meet again, not as shadows, but as brothers. Cale. Thorn read the words twice, then folded the parchment carefully and placed it beside the journal. Lucien watched him. You okay? Thorn nodded, eyes shimmering. I think I finally am. Lucien pulled him into a quiet embrace, arms warm and steady. Outside, the moon rose higher. Inside, the past settled gently into memory. And the future, soft, wild, and unwritten, waited just beyond the garden gate.